welcome to the Headache Doctor podcast, where it's our mission to educate and empower everyone with headaches and migraines so that you can break free from a life of fear of your next headache or migraine and dependence on medication, allowing you to thrive in everything you do. Hello and welcome to the Headache Doctor podcast, where it's our mission to educate and empower everyone with headaches and migraines so that you can break free from a life of fear of your next headache or migraine and dependence on medication. In today's podcast, I have a very special guest. This is this is Dr. Murrer, another provider here at Novera Headache Center. And we have a very interesting topic that I think a lot of, especially our female audience out there, which I would imagine most of you are women. Women are 2 to 3 times more likely to experience headaches and migraines. And with that come changes in hormones and hormonal related migraines. But we're also going to talk about exercise and how that relates to that. So thank you for being on the Headache Doctor podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited.
So let's jump into it. As we were reviewing our notes and what to talk about, the first thing that we should do is just lay out sort of a foundation of what a normal cycle is. And I guess before we jump into the weeds here, again, if you're a female, if you like to exercise, and then even if you just have headaches or migraines and are looking to be healthier, you're going to glean information from this. I would even say, are our male listeners going to get something out of this too?
Potentially.
Okay.
We won't leave them out.
But this is going to be extremely helpful for our female listeners. And so we're going to talk about the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle to start. And then as we go, we'll get into some of the specifics of application and exercise. So don't tune out here as we talk about some of the nitty-gritty. But go ahead. Let's start with the phases of the menstrual cycle.
Yeah, and I think it would be helpful too to start with like what cycle syncing is too,
okay,
and the purpose of it. So cycle syncing in like the past 2-3 years has become a little bit more mainstream. It's become more like you see it in articles or on social media, but there's still a lot of really big gaps in the literature regarding the female the female response to exercise. Whether that be just like the fluctuations in hormones throughout the month, and just how their bodies feel after exercise is a really big key. So what cycle syncing tries to do is kind of match those like modes of exercise based on what your hormones are doing throughout the month, which is great if your cycle is fairly regular and normal. But even if it's not, and even if there are some fluctuations in your cycle, there's still some really good takeaways, because the biggest key is just listening to your body and paying attention to a lot of those cues that it's giving you. So
yeah, I love it. I'm excited because I just think this is going to be super helpful. So it's a topic we haven't really hit on the podcast before. So yeah, let's talk through the different phases.
Yes. So you got 4 phases. First phase, that first 7 days or so, is your menstrual phase. During that phase, your hormone levels, particularly estrogen and progesterone, are really, really low. They're at their lowest throughout your whole cycle. Because of this decline, you can start to feel more physical symptoms like cramping, fatigue, bloating, breast tenderness, things like that, as well as some emotional changes like mood swings, irritability, even like mild sadness, depression, stuff like that. So that is that first phase. The second phase we want to look at is your follicular phase. So this is right after that menstrual cycle ends and that period right before ovulation. So during this phase, your pituitary gland is releasing that follicle-stimulating hormone, which is also stimulating the growth of follicles in the ovaries. And then as those follicles grow, they're producing more estrogen. So during this phase, you're getting a pretty steady increase in estrogen.
Okay.
So with that, it's also impacting mood and energy. So you might feel a little bit more energetic, a little bit more like less sad, I guess.
Yeah.
Is the way to put it there.
You just feel better.
Yeah, you feel better. You feel you kind of came out of the woods. So then the third phase that we start walking into is ovulation. So that's kind of happening right in the middle of the cycle. And at that point, we're releasing an egg from the ovary, and your estrogen levels are like surging. They're going way, way up, as well as the luteinizing hormone, which is then triggering the release of an egg. So during this time, you might feel like just more like energetic, more confident, all the good stuff. And then finally, that last phase is right after ovulation. You're looking at your luteal phase. And then that is going to last between ovulation and the beginning of that next menstrual period. And during this time, we're releasing more progesterone. Our bodies are producing more. So as that is rising and those estrogen levels are remaining pretty elevated, you might start to feel some more of those like PMS sort of symptoms. So like that bloating, the fatigue, breast tenderness, stuff like that. But with that, there can be a lot of fluctuation there. So, but each of these changes in the hormones, this is what we're really focusing on today, is what change in hormones happens during each of those phases, and then how is that going to impact the way you might want to move and exercise.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about exercise. The interesting thing, if you've listened to the podcast before where I talk about the hormonal related migraines and how what we do can still be impactful, is you've got the actual site of pain, so the tissue itself that's irritated, and then through each of these phases, specifically estrogen, and the level of estrogen is impacting whether it's your overall mood or your ability to tolerate those symptoms or that pain signal in your neck. And so we want to create an environment where people can move, where they can do the things that are healthy for their body. And maybe we're not changing an irregular cycle to a regular cycle, or maybe we're not impacting hormones, but as physical therapists, we want to provide you with whatever we can to reduce the level of tension through your neck, through your shoulders. And so harmonizing this information with, okay, now how do we incorporate movement at the right time? It's amazing. So,
and it makes it more sustainable, because the idea behind this is that you're working with your body instead of working against it based on those just physiologic changes.
Yeah, I love it. So let's talk about what that looks like.
Yeah, so going back to that menstrual phase, that first week of the cycle, again, that's when the estrogen and progesterone levels are the lowest. So during that time, you're probably going to feel a lot more fatigue. But with that, moderate intensity sort of exercise can help alleviate some of those menstrual symptoms, help improve mood. We're releasing those endorphins, but also a lot of low impact activities like walking, swimming, yoga, Pilates, what have you, are definitely more recommended. But the cool thing about this is that how it impacts recovery, it may be a little bit easier due to those lower hormone levels. And we'll kind of touch on that throughout the different cycles. But because that estrogen is really low, recovery is a little bit smoother.
So when you say recovery, are we talking like muscle recovery, like less, like the period of soreness is reduced or less soreness, things like that?
Yep.
Interesting.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Because then, go ahead.
Well, so in general, you want a lower intensity exercise, but then you're going to be able to maybe increase the frequency of exercise. Okay.
But again, at that point, it's very important just to like prioritize how your body is feeling.
Okay.
Prioritizing rest and hydration and nourishing foods. Diet is really important at this point because we want to make sure that we're giving all the different, building blocks there to optimize that recovery.
Yeah. All right, so where do we go from there?
So now we're in phase 2, so that follicular phases. And this is when your estrogen is starting to rise a little bit more. So with that, you're getting better energy. This is where you might see a change in how your endurance feels. So doing, high intensity interval training might feel a little bit better, or like cardiovascular heavy workouts. This is the time to start playing around with that. It also, because of that increase in estrogen levels, this is a great time to start implementing some strength training, because we're able to optimize that we have those increased estrogen levels and promote more muscle growth.
All right.
But with that, because of that slight rise in estrogen, recovery also might be still fairly efficient. But again, this is the time to continue to prioritize rest and nutrition and hydration.
Yeah, so we've got, let's see, the first phase is about a week. Yeah, so day 1 to 7, and then the second phase is another week. So is it like an actual like 7-day week? I mean, I know the first phase of menstruation can be like a 5-day window as far as people experience symptoms.
It can be a 5-day window. It could be a 10-day window. It could be, that's
Okay.
where there's a
So
lot
there's
of
a little bit of,
fluctuation.
okay.
Yeah.
So it's not as if it's day 1, day 7, and 8 on, you start moving. Okay.
No, and there's other ways to track that as far as like temperature and just body changes that,
Sure.
you know, if you're tracking those things, you can start paying attention to where that shift might be occurring. But these are just kind of general week guidelines to make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, 4 phases in the month, so we'll break it up into weeks.
Yes.
I got it. Okay. All right, so phase 2 is going to be more strength training, higher intensity. You might see a little bit of a difference in your ability to recover, but still pretty good.
Yeah, at that point, you're starting to feel better, so take advantage of it and go.
Yeah,
So
okay. All right, phase 3.
Phase 3 is where this like peak of your energy, strength, and overall performance is going to happen. So
Okay.
this is during our ovulation phase. This is when it's really, really ideal to start doing higher intensity workouts, strength training still, kind of from that last phase. But it's also a really good time to experiment with like power-based movements as well, because our explosive movements are a little bit easier to do during this time because you've got increased energy, and that's going to help impact like your coordination and things like that as well. So this is kind of when you want to focus in on that. However, one of the things to keep in mind is that where recovery still might be really efficient during this time, some people might experience increased joint laxity. So if you tend to have like hypermobility already, or if you tend to have joint pain and what have you, maybe don't do the power-based movements. Listen to your body again. So
Yeah, so give us some examples of when you say power-based movements. What might that look like?
think like any of like your explosive plyometric kind of movements.
Okay. If someone, I'm thinking of maybe like a college athlete, and depending on the sport, but I would imagine most of them, if they're in the height of that competition, I'm a soccer player, so.
This is a great time to compete.
Yeah, great time to compete. But training as well, so plyometric training, maybe if you're at a different phase of life and you're just trying to stay in shape and just look at overall health, are there different types of like home exercises that might be more power based?
I mean, there's so many different things that we can just do with body weight.
Yeah.
Even like jumping movements, things like that. Like that's
Box jumps.
Yeah.
Jump rope.
Yeah. Jump
Okay.
squats,
Yep.
which are my least favorite, but they're good. So
Yeah. Burpees.
yeah, fun.
Awesome. Okay. And then you said impact on recovery. So it can still be efficient, but you have to be more mindful of that.
Yeah, and again, this is going to come down to just the individual, and you know, everyone knows their body the best, right?
Yeah.
Because you've lived with it your whole life. So if you start to feel some aches and pains, this is a really good time to kind of hone in on that, like warm up, cool down, stretching, and really making sure that you're maximizing that as well.
Yeah, that's stuff none of us like to do.
Yeah.
Maybe there's people that like to do it, but I personally like to just jump right into it.
Yep.
So this phase would be right up my alley. Okay, phase 4.
Phase 4, this is when we're getting into that luteal phase. And so at this point, your estrogen is still remaining steady, but we're getting an increase in those progesterone levels. However, with this phase, we're often experiencing decreased energy levels and higher water retention rates too. So this is another point in this cycle that maybe focusing on some of those lower intensity exercises might be a little bit more beneficial. And this is also a period where, fatigue might really be starting to creep back up. So listen to that. Don't fight into it unless you're just like really, really have a routine that you love. But if this is kind of where you're leaning, just listen to that. Do like gentle stretching, go for a walk, yoga, Pilates, stuff like that. Just avoid overexertion. And again, this is kind of going from that last phase, really paying attention to those like warm-ups, cool-downs, throwing some foam rolling. This is a great time for it. So
yeah, so it also sounds like with each phase, so one thing that we harp on here when we're providing someone with an exercise to do at home, it's important that we do it properly.
Yeah.
And oftentimes with home exercises, and by home exercises, I'm talking about maybe you are on YouTube and you find kind of a workout class you go through, or growing up, my parents really liked to do P90X, or maybe you go to a group fitness class. So whatever it is, generally, when you're at home, you're being instructed to go through a series of exercises, and it's assumed that you're having proper form. Now, a lot of exercises can be really a good thing. I mean, exercise is beneficial for a lot of different reasons, but if we're thinking about someone, especially in the phase 3, you said if you have like an increase in joint laxity, which may mean there's a lack of some stability there. And so it sounds like in phase 1 and phase 4, you just have to be extra aware of like doing these movements properly. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to fatigue a little quicker, pay attention to that. And if you're in that phase of your cycle, maybe you don't have the same expectation. And so you're not like beating yourself up for taking a break.
Exactly. Because the idea here is creating something that's sustainable,
mm-hmm.
and again, feels like you're working with your body instead of forcing it to do things that it's not in the position to do as well.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, because when it comes to exercise, the intensity is important. We want to get your heart rate up, but the movement itself, like getting your joints to move in and out of certain positions, is beneficial, and that's not dependent on a certain intensity level. Right?
Right.
And so that's one thing we try to hit on. And you can get that with yoga, with just walking, with those lower intensity movements. But we also have benefits on the cardiovascular system when we get the intensity up. But then there's that, like I was saying, there's sort of that balance between too intense so that you're compensating, which if you got shoulder dysfunction and your levator scapula, which runs from your shoulder to your neck, is having to do a ton of work, your neck's probably not going to be too happy with you if you push through something that you're compensating with.
Especially in a phase like, for example, like during ovulation where there may be a little bit more joint laxity, mm-hmm. those muscles are going to be working a lot harder to create that stability. Mm-hmm. So if you already have some sort of baseline of those muscles already working really hard to just like keep your posture up and keeping your head up, adding in that extra layer of joint laxity can also be another component that could be a trigger for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had mentioned before we started recording that there's a gap in the literature. Like this is an area that needs to be researched better.
So much. Yeah. There are huge gaps when it comes to the female body and the response to exercise, both as far as hormones go, as well as recovery, as well as just optimizing what kind of exercise for when mm-hmm. is important. There's a huge lack of data. There's quite a bit of data when it comes to the male body and how it responds to exercise and recovery and all of that, but historically, there's not that with females. And so this is still something that's emerging. A lot of this cycle syncing data is data. I say that with air quotes. A lot of it is anecdotal and a lot of it is based in theory, but it's still worth something to look into. And I've actually had a few patients start doing that and building a routine based on their cycle, and if anything, it's created an opportunity to make something more sustainable.
Yeah, and it's being mindful.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people will benefit greatly from, just understanding your body and listening to your body.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we need permission to do that. I feel like oftentimes the allopathic system is sort of drawing people away from that. Like, here, just take this intervention, mm-hmm. as opposed to listening to the patient or listening and encouraging the patient to listen to their own body. What are some So we also talked about how if someone doesn't have a regular cycle, how they can navigate this.
So with that, I always tell people to really pay attention to what does your fatigue feel like? Do
Yeah.
you have any joint achiness? Like what do you feel like when you do different sorts of activities? Because there may be one day that taking a brisk walk feels awesome and you're like super energized afterwards and you're just feeling really good. And then there's other days that same brisk walk might have you feeling like you just need to lay on the floor for a while. So those are the things to start paying attention to, because your body's going to tell you. You just kind of have to stop and listen to it.
Yeah, that's great. So the takeaway is don't get caught up in this understanding what specific phase you're in so much.
Yeah.
Unless you're able to understand that in yourself. And being mindful of your body and just understand that the expectation, depending on the time of the month, might not be to work out as high of an intensity, and maybe you dial it back.
Yeah. And to not beat yourself up when your body doesn't feel like it's cooperating to where you want it, because it's much easier to create a sustainable routine where you're working with how you feel versus kind of guilting yourself into doing exercises that you just might not feel up to doing.
Yeah, and if you have hormonal migraine symptoms, the phase 1 of menstruation is that 5-day window there that generally women will experience their migraine symptoms. So the when we're adding symptoms onto this, it might make sense to lower your intensity because you just don't have the capacity anymore.
Yeah.
And but doing something, if possible, would be the avenue that just again, there's benefits to that intensity being higher, but if you can just move, walk, do some yoga, just get your body in and out of certain positions and give the joints the movement they're looking for, giving certain muscles a break, all that. And so and then when you do have the opportunity, take advantage of the feel-good moments.
Yeah.
Awesome. Becca, anything else for us?
No, I think that about sums it up.
Yeah, this is fantastic. I really do. I think this is going to be, a popular podcast. I think this is going to be something that people have not heard before. Even our very health-minded population or health-minded listeners will probably be able to glean a lot from this. And I love the fact that I really think it's going to empower people, because connecting the dots between, hey, I've been diagnosed with a hormonal migraine, and what does my neck have to do with that? And then this is it sort of complements everything that we're trying to do with people, and then provides them with the education, that empowerment. So yeah, it fits in so well. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Absolutely.
By the way, if you are a listener and if you're local, if you're from out of state, and you have been considering coming out here for treatment, I just want you to know that Dr. Murrer is excellent at what she does, and as evidenced by the podcast and the conversation we just had, you can work with her. And I'm the face, the voice of Novera, and but behind the scenes, so you get past me, and there's a lot of very wonderful people that actually do a better job than I do, and Becca's one of those. So I appreciate you being part of the team. Thank you guys so much, the listeners, for listening to the Headache Doctor podcast. As always, it's our mission to educate and empower everyone with headaches and migraines so you can break free from a life of fear of your next headache or migraine and dependence on medication, allowing you to thrive in everything you do. Thanks for listening.